My name's John McCourt. I'm going to be talking about my mother, Annie McCourt, um, formerly Annie McGrory.
Was she born in Derry?
Now, my mother was born in Hillside in County Donegal, just outside Buncrana. My grandfather was a tailor in Buncrana, and my mother was from a large family. And actually, my mother, to the best of my knowledge, had absolutely no connection at all with politics. And then I found out in 1972 that my grandfather's brother had been on the run from the Black and Tans in the 1920s. So, yeah, she kept a lot of stuff very close to her chest.
How many were in your family? How brothers, sisters?
I have two brothers and had a sister. And, we lived in Cregan, lived in Carrigray Gardens in Cregan. Went up there in 1966 after coming out of the children's home that we'd spent 10 years in. And we arrived in Cregan in a house that literally had bleached floorboards and borrowed furniture and a mattress that my mother made with a big piece of cloth she got out of a factory stuffed with all of the offcuts of the old of shirts from the shirt factory. And the girls brought them to her, a pillowcase at a time. So that's what we had when we moved into a house in Carrigray Gardens. It was an upstairs flat, which was really handy for my mother, or would become really handy for my mother.
So she seemed to be very innovative to keep the family together and do what needs to be done. She was a
Yeah,
full-time mom, and
my mother could make something out of nothing. Food was there. Everybody got fed. And, she'd worked from she left school in the shirt factory until my father was injured in an accident. And she was pregnant at the same time. She ended up in hospital in labour with my younger sister. And my father was taken to a military hospital in England. And as a result of that, we spent 10 years in a children's home. Didn't talk a lot about it. And she always was, I think, a very, very private person. And but we made do with what was there, and the support of an amazing community and great neighbours. Yeah.
so you've spoken a little bit about what type of person your mom was. Could you elaborate any more about, in general, what kind of a person she was growing up, and how, as you got older, how much more you got to know her?
Well, I think when I look at it now, I think my mother had no experience of motherhood at all. We were very young when we were taken from her. My sister had just been born and was taken from her. So the first time she comes across like three teenagers is in 1966. So I think a lot of it was she made it up as she went along. She had a support network of a family. We had, I think, 5 aunts in Derry and one uncle in Derry. So, we had a constant stream of aunts and uncles and cousins coming in and out and in and out. Much as I said, my mother was a private person. She didn't talk a lot to people about what had happened. In fact, she didn't talk to us that much about what had happened. She just got on with what was there. And, I can't be anything but grateful for that.
So you allude to, later on, you found out things about your mom and her role in the troubles that you hadn't known. So describe what you learned what was her part in that time?
Yeah, I was a young student, and when the first Civil Rights March took place in Derry, I turned up on that. And of course, my mother's first question that evening was, "What were you doing there?" And secondly, what happened? And from that, it just things for me just seemed to take a different slide altogether. I spent the next couple of years certainly on marches and protests and all the rest. And my mother, as far as I was aware, stayed at home and so just let me get on with it. My older brother had gone on quite a few of the marches, but that was as far as he went. And eventually, by the time we get through 1969, the situation has completely changed. The army are on the streets, and I think that's the first time I'd actually I think, heard my mother swear when she realised that the army were here. Dealing with the police was one thing, because by 1969 they'd already been at our house a couple of times. And certainly coming into the early part of the 70s, visits became more frequent, shall we say. Um, and my mother started to get herself ready for this. I mean, if this is going to happen, she wasn't going to just be there. She wasn't going to comply. She wasn't going to just do what they wanted, particularly what the army wanted her to do. So I think from that point, my mother started going on marches, particularly after internment. She marched against internment, and I think that sort of, for me, was the start of what was a sort of a politicization, really, as far as I was concerned, of my mother not realizing that she had a generation of history on this, on this stuff, on protest and on the conflict in this country. And I mean, coming into July 1971, our house was getting raided more often. My mother was getting more prepared. And it sometimes, I think back and I laugh about this now, because when the army would be coming to the door, she'd hear the armoured cars coming up the street. She'd always be in if I was at home. She'd be in if I was sleeping on the sofa, or if I was in bed. John, the army are here. The army are coming. So I'd be up and out the back window and down the drain, piping over the wall, and just wondering what would happen. Sometimes I'd just be in the flat next door while the army are. I could hear the noise and turning stuff over in the house, and my mother's shouting and roaring. But before they even got to the door, my mother had a special treat for them. Milkmen. We don't have milkmen anymore, which is sort of unfortunate. Maybe in some ways a bit of a blessing. But as I said, we lived in an upstairs flat, and there's a window directly above the front door of the flat. And people normally went downstairs at night and washed out their milk bottles, left them sitting on the doorstep for the milkman to collect in the morning. My mother washed the milk bottles out, left them sitting on the window above the door, so that when the army or the police came, she opened the window and she just started firing bottles down at them. And that was my mother. I'd hear her, if I was next door and they're turning the house over, they come in and they turn my grandfather, who at that point was over 90 years of age, out of his bed, and searching for whatever they were searching for. And my mother, even as they were going out the door, would still be at them. And a friend of mine, this was just, it was like resistance all the way with my mother. And the thing about it, she was a tiny wee woman. She's a heart like a lion. I'm sick of it. When I was at my full height, I was over 6'6". My mother would have been 5. If she was 5 foot, was the height of it, And but the fight was in her. And right through, I remember Operation Motorman again. I had been at home earlier in the evening. I knew I wasn't going to be there that night, or I knew I wasn't going to be in Cregan that night. And my mother's getting ready for this. Of course, the milk bottles are all out on the windowsill again. And when they came in, my mother started firing bottles down at the army, and a soldier fired a rubber bullet at her. And it went in through the window that she had opened. It didn't hit her. It went in through the window that she had opened. And she managed to get it, and she kept it. And on her 90th birthday, my mother presented that rubber bullet to the Museum of Free Derry. And it's down there in a glass case with her name beside it. It's a really interesting story around this rubber bullet. So there was a friend of mine, he was an engineer, made a copper casing for it. And my mother every day, every couple of days, would shine this up with brass. So it would be gleaming, sitting on the windowsill. The army are coming in and out of the house. And one of the things they did when they came into the house was pull the curtains. But as they pulled the curtains, my mother saw the soldier lift this rubber bullet and put it inside his jacket. And when they were finished searching, my mother called him, and the soldier went down the stairs into the back of the armoured car. My mother went down the stairs into the back of the armoured car, took off her slipper, started hitting him about the head with the slipper until he handed it back to her. Gave it back to her. Soldiers never tried to steal that rubber bullet again. No, that was the kind of her, there was just a fight in her, and I think it had been something back from her days in Hillside when the Black and Tans came looking for my grandfather's brother. They lived literally on a hillside outside of Dunree in County Donegal. And that was something that always stayed with her. I remember when a movie came out years later, and she was a lot older. She'd have been in her 90s, I think, at that point. And the music came on, and the music was the one that played the barley. And she listened to the music, she starts singing along with it. And the first scene in this is the black and tans. And my grandchildren were in the house watching, because I got it specially for her to watch it. My grandchildren were in the house watching the movie along with their granny. And as soon as she saw the black and tan, she came straight out with those effing bastards. And I remember them the time they kicked down the door of our house in Hillside. And that was almost it was over 90 years, well, close to 90 years before. So, she protested. The blanket protest, she was out there. Internment protest, she was out there. When the army took over the schools during Operation Motorman, she was out there. If a young fella got stopped in the street by soldiers, my mother was straight down. And my mother had a very special name people gave her. When she came out the door, the first thing she had was she crocheted and she knitted, and she fixed stuff up for people, but she crocheted this wee tricolour lanyard, and she had a whistle on it, a referee's whistle. As soon as the army came in the street, my mother had the lanyard on, the whistle in her mouth, out the door, into the backyard, out with the dustbin lid, and she would be rattling that dustbin lid. So that's what they called her, Annie Bin Lid. I know, in Derry, bin lid means crazy. Maybe sometimes, yeah, she got a wee bit crazy. But that was my mother, just absolute and total resistance. And passive resistance was something that wasn't going to work with my mother. You had to be out there and you had to be doing stuff. Sitting back and shouting about it, writing letters about it. No, get out there, challenge them all the time. And that's what she did.
Why do you think it's important to remember your mother and other relatives who played a part like herself during the Troubles?
I think when history looks back, we will have stars that rise. There will be people that as a result of this, the profile that they had became known to a lot of people. And I think, without all of the people behind them, without all of those people in a community that supported, that fought, that marched, that protested, they could not have done what they'd done. They wouldn't have been rising stars. It needed that support network, and that support network. And I'm actually glad I'm talking about my mother, because I feel that the role of women, particularly in that support network, hasn't really been covered. And my mother would consider what she did was just what a mother would do. That if she wasn't protecting me, she was protecting somebody else's child, and that's what she would do. And protecting the community that for us, took us and welcomed us, and made us a part of it. And my mother, I think, was always indebted to that community as a result of the help that they gave her. And my mother, this was her way of paying back. And as much as she could, and as much as I think women in Derry could, they would stand up. And the role, as I said, of passive resistance was something a lot of women went beyond. I'm grateful for the fight that she put up, because I know that and the fight of particularly other women informed the decisions of a lot of our young people. And I think as well as the fight, there's a way of fighting, that allows you to maintain your dignity. And I think that was part of what they did. It was done with dignity. It was done with challenge. Nobody was going to get to put the boot on the back of a Derry woman's neck. And I think Derry women did their best to make sure that nobody would do it on a Derry man or a Derry boy either. No, they need to be remembered. They were amazing, amazing people.